An emergency ministerial meeting of the Hague Group on Palestine is underway in Bogotá, Colombia. Brazil's Attorney General's office filed a request to convict former President Jair Bolsonaro and 7 other defendants for attempting a coup d'état in 2023. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday in Beijing in the framework of the ministerial meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Stay with us. An emergency ministerial meeting on Palestine of the Hague Group is underway in Bogotá, Colombia. The Hague Group was established on January 31st, 2025 by Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Senegal, and South Africa. The current gathering was convened in response to Israel's ongoing and escalating violations of international law in occupied Palestinian territories. Participants will focus on coordinated legal and diplomatic measures to bring them to an end. At the event, states are expected to announce concrete actions to enforce international law against Israel. At the installation of the meeting, participants such as United Nations Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese and Palestinian State Minister Riyad Mansour further condemned the Israeli genocide on the Strip.
Our meeting today is a rare demonstration of political courage at a time when world politics is marred in duplicity of principles in action in the face of cataclysmic violence and complicity in genocide. You are the brave vanguard who are opening the door for action. You will be followed by others, and history taught us the beginning of historic changes would require a group of brave ones to open the door so that others to follow them. You are the brave ones here in this meeting that you are opening this door of action.
In addition, the Minister of the Palestinian State addressed recent efforts by international organizations to condemn the genocide in Gaza and urged for concrete actions to stop Israel's aggression.
Stated very accurately, what we need is not reaffirmation of principles. What we need is implementation. We need action. This conference, the Madrid conference, and others that will follow, are ushering the beginning of a new atmosphere or a new stage in the struggle of the Palestinian people by implementing international law and the will of the international community reflected in the historic advisory opinion of the ICJ and the resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly.
For her part, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, urged nations to suspend ties of all kinds with the State of Israel.
What the Hague Group has committed to do and considering expanding upon is the basic commitment to what's just and due based on your obligations under international law. Obligations, not sympathy, not charity. Each state must immediately review and suspend all ties with the State of Israel. Military, strategic, political, diplomatic, economic relations, both imports and exports, and to make sure that their private sectors, insurers, banks, pension funds, universities, and other goods and service providers in the supply chain do the same. Treating the occupation as business as usual translates into supporting and providing aid and assistance to the unlawful presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. The same that the International Court of Justice in July last year has ordered to end totally and unconditionally, and that the General Assembly has ordered this to happen by September.
3 members of the United Nations Commission investigating human rights violations in Israel and Palestine have resigned. The investigative commission created in 2021 received numerous criticisms from Israel. Some former commissioners explained after resigning that the decision answers to other arguments and pressures. The resignations followed the U.S. decision to impose sanctions against the United Nations Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese. The United Nations had previously warned of violations of its founding charter and international law by several member states, especially in the context of Israel's aggression against the Gaza Strip. In the last hours, the Israeli government, which perceives itself as a victim, has attacked 3 countries: Palestine, Lebanon and Syria. Nearly 50 people have been killed by the genocidal Israeli army fire in Palestine. According to medical sources, 11 people were killed at dawn. At the same time, the war criminals' artillery attacked several points in the West Bank. Almost simultaneously, occupation forces shelled the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon, once again violating the ceasefire agreement. Furthermore, Israeli troops carried out an attack in Suwaida, where local media claimed that more than 30 people were killed and nearly 100 wounded. Syrian Defense Minister Muhav Abu Kasra declared a ceasefire in the Suwaida southern city, but clashes among Druze fighters, Bedouin tribes, the de facto army and Israeli forces have continued, disregarding the deal and the death toll of 99. Amid this war-like scenario, the Druze has been opposed to the de facto government, so Israeli forces support the Druze while the de facto national army backs Bedouin tribes. Subsequently, the national armed forces alongside Bedouin tribes have taken over the Druze majority Suwaida city. As a result, Druze leaders agreed on the ceasefire, but they recently denounced that the de facto army had breached the truce by firing civilians. Likewise, Israeli forces had been dropping bombs on the Suwaida city to stop the advance of both the armed forces and Bedouin tribes in the city. In Sudan, paramilitary fighters of the Rapid Support Forces RSF killed almost 300 civilians in a wave of assaults on villages in North Kordofan state that began on Saturday. According to the Sudanese legal advocacy group Emergency Lawyers, at least 200 people were shot or burned to death in Shag al-Nom, while 38 others were killed in surrounding settlements. Another attack on Sunday in Hilat Hamid killed another 46 people, while 48 people were killed and 37 injured in other villages. International human rights organizations are already accusing the RSF of war crimes and crimes against humanity in a civil war that has raged since April 2023, and this conflict has created what the United Nations calls the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with more than half of Sudan's 48 million people facing acute hunger and recurring disease outbreaks. And now we have a short break coming up. But first, remember, you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Monday, Brazil's Attorney General's office filed a request to convict former President Jair Bolsonaro and 7 other defendants for attempting a coup d'etat in 2023. In a 517-page briefing presented by Attorney General Paulo Gonad before the Supreme Federal Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, conviction is asked for Bolsonaro and other defendants for the crimes of armed criminal organization, attempted violent abolition of the democratic rule of law, coup d'etat, among others. The document is part of the prosecution's closing arguments, the last phase before the trial, which is expected to take place in September. The maximum penalties for these crimes exceeded 30 years in prison. The move evidences the failure of the White House's pressure strategy, contrary to the expected effect. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva signed a decree on Monday authorizing the country to take reciprocal measures in response to the 50% tariff announced by Donald Trump on Brazilian products. The decree implements the so-called reciprocity law approved by Congress in May and allows Brazil to adopt diplomatic and trade countermeasures if negotiations to avoid the U.S. tariff fail. The law prioritizes diplomatic resolution but empowers the government to impose proportionate restrictions if no agreement is reached. Brazilian officials have begun consultations with exporters to assess the economic impact and define a response strategy. The United States is Brazil's second largest trading partner, and the dispute raises the prospect of a potential trade war between the two countries. The Cuban government reaffirmed its commitment to addressing the country's social vulnerabilities. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel announced that the National Assembly of People's Powers permanent commissions are discussing ways to overcome the country's current crisis. He added that these actions depend on collective efforts, intelligence and creativity. The Cuban leader also emphasized the importance of addressing the country's social vulnerability, stating that it cannot be overlooked and is one of the most critical aspects of militant responsibility. In Argentina, all rates rose Monday, including both the blue and official dollar. Subsequently, analysts estimate complex scenarios for the Milei administration. In this context, the blue dollar, worth 1,340 pesos, has reached its higher value since April. Meanwhile, the official dollar is getting close to the government ceiling, 1,400 pesos, as it is currently equal to 1,095 pesos. Such inflation directly impacts on the people's purchasing power. Thus, the domestic economic crisis has deepened amid a scenario of tensions between the Milei administration and the governors of the provincial funds and pensions. Likewise, economists ensure that the situation triggers instability of markets. In Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro described as a historical stain on El Salvador the criminal acts of the Salvadoran president against Venezuelan citizens. The Venezuelan head of state pointed out that the more than 250 Venezuelan nationals who are currently being held hostage in the SECOT in El Salvador have been denied the right to lawyers and visits. He also pointed out that Bukele is a figure widely questioned in the world for his human rights violations and the fraudulent way in which he became president of his country. In this sense, the Attorney General of the Republic, Tarek William Saab, reaffirmed Venezuela's position against the kidnapping of Venezuelans disguised as deportation by the United States and El Salvador, who, in addition to violating human rights, also violate the international rights of these migrants who have not been proven to have committed any crime and have been isolated from their families. The emergency regime imposed in El Salvador by President Nayib Bukele has cost the lives of 427 people deprived of liberty, but this figure is actually an undercount, as the death could be more than 1,000. This has been assured by the non-governmental organization Socorro Jurídico, whose investigations also show that 94% of these people did not have the profile of gang members. The data come from the victims' own relatives and have also shown that none of the deceased had been tried or convicted, that is, they died without knowing what they were accused of. The situation is extremely worrying since, according to official data, the regime of President Bukele keeps in prison about 88,000 citizens, which represents almost 2% of the population, not counting the kidnapped foreigners. Three people, two Jamaicans and a Bahamian, died in Haiti's capital after a shootout with police during an anti-drug operation. The figures were confirmed on Monday by the Haitian Ministry of Justice. Precisely, the anti-drug operation resulted in the seizure of at least 1,045 kilograms of cocaine, which was distributed in 49 bags. The Haitian National Police engaged in a shootout with those involved during the intervention. Of those killed, only Jamaican Anthony Jimmy has been identified. Haitian authorities confirmed the death and arrest of others, reaffirming their commitment to fighting drug trafficking. And we have a second short break coming up. Before we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English, there you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverage and much more. Follow our page and activate the notification button to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday in Beijing in the framework of the ministerial meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The leaders reaffirmed the strong momentum of the China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership, with President Xi stressing the need for continued mutual support on multilateral platforms, safeguarding both countries' security interests and strengthening solidarity with Global South countries. Furthermore, Xi highlighted the significance of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in guaranteeing stability across the Russian continent. For his part, the Russian top diplomat reaffirmed his country's strong commitment to developing ties with Beijing and pledged to work together to ensure the success of the upcoming bloc summit in Tianjin. China delivered to the Nicaraguan government 920 houses as part of the first phase of the Nuevas Victorias housing project located in Sabana Grande, southeast of Managua. The action is a sign of growing bilateral relations and took place on the eve of the 46th anniversary of the Sandinista People's Revolution. During the ceremony, Chinese Ambassador Chen Shi highlighted the efficiency of the joint work between Chinese and Nicaraguan technicians. For his part, Presidential Advisor Laureano Ortega Murillo thanked President Xi Jinping and the Communist Party for what he described as an act of love towards Nicaragua. Both governments reaffirmed that their cooperation is based on mutual respect, with a common goal of building a development model that directly benefits their peoples.
Nicaragua. Since 900 houses have never been delivered together, and at the same time in the history of our country. And it also represents a historic milestone for the bilateral relationship between the Chinese government and the government of Nicaragua, which is getting stronger day by day in its strategic partnership. We will continue with this fraternal and supportive program of the People's Republic of China. Next September, we will start the construction of the second phase of the Nuevas Victorias' social housing program. We are already working hand in hand with the Nantan Xinjiang Company for the construction of these 720 new homes of the second phase of the program.
Heavy rain swept across the U.S. northeast on Monday night, triggering flash flooding in parts of New York and New Jersey that stranded vehicles closed subway lines, which led to declare a state of emergency. Flash flood watches and warnings were issued for sections of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and nearby areas as slow-moving storms brought rainfall rates of up to 7.6 centimeters per hour, with some flooding reaching depths of around 1.5 meters inside homes. Officials advise people to stay indoors and avoid unnecessary travel as emergency responders dealt with flooded roads, delayed transportation, and stranded buses, particularly in places west of of the Hudson River in New Jersey. The National Weather Service highlighted the risk of repeated rounds of heavy downpours over already saturated areas, raising the danger of significant and sudden urban flooding. In Russia, Moscow authorities reported flooding in several areas of the city after heavy rains. Local authorities reported that several vehicles were covered with water due to flooding, trapping at least 7 people. In view of the weather conditions, the temporary closure of several subway stations was announced for safety reasons. For the moment, no human losses or injuries have been reported. In other informations, the World Health Organization and UNICEF said that more than 14 million children did not receive a single vaccine last year. In their annual estimate of global immunization coverage released Tuesday, the organizations acknowledged that millions of children around the world are at increasing risk of contracting serious diseases and dying due to the declining childhood immunization rates. The figures released show that more than 30 million children worldwide are not fully immunized against measles, mumps and rubella, and that 14.3 million children have not received a single routine childhood immunization. The United Nations experts said that access to vaccines remains deeply unequal and that conflicts and humanitarian crises are rapidly undoing the progress made, acknowledging that the collapse of international aid this year will make it more difficult to reduce the number of unprotected children. And with this information, we have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok as well. For Telesur English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.